Roses. They symbolize love, passion, and devotion. We give them to people we adore to celebrate anniversaries, first dates, even as an apology when we've messed up. But roses don't just belong to the living. They're scattered at grave sites, draped over caskets, and woven into funeral wreaths. Love and loss, beauty and decay. Roses exist in that strange space between life and death. Now imagine this, a crime scene covered in rose petals, crimson-stained petals trailing toward a lifeless body. Rose petals scattered around is usually romantic, but here, it's something else. Something deeply unsettling, almost like a twisted love letter. What kind of person would do that? What message are they trying to send? This content contains topics related to CSAM. Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 49.5 of the Darklivity podcast. I'm your host, Kimbyrleigha, and I am back with my co-host, my husband, Jonathan.
Hi. Darklivity is the dark downward slope to the degradation of the human mind and the consequences that such darkness brings to light.
It's okay if he mispronounces our entire definition because he's cute.
I did?
It's okay. No, you just did one little thing, but it was cute, so who cares? So we just transported you to our studio kitchen where we spend all week eating everything while we're making content for all of you. And they probably know this. I'm a really bad eater. I mean, like, bad. I do not eat healthy, and I'll be the first one to admit that. However, that is why I love Thrive Market, because I can easily order over 5,000 healthy and organic grocery items, all from my phone app or their website. We're going to show you some of the things we got in this box. I mean, I'm showcasing some of them right here for you, but it's easy because, you know, I'm not going to get in the car with the baby and a teenager. My teenager has a bunch of stuff of her own that she does every week. So it's easy for me not to have to get in the car, go to the grocery store, find parking in LA. That'll never happen, right? So if I didn't have Thrive Market, I wouldn't be eating as good as I am because I've made a lot more healthy choices because I love to snack. These are Harvest Snaps. They are the baked green pea snacks. And last time I bought this, you ate the whole thing. So I got two this time for that reason.
Delicious.
They really are. And of course, I had to have my olives. And he really likes these little drinks. I got him vanilla cold brew. I also got this matcha one that I haven't tried. And that's the other thing. I love trying new things. And the app is so easy to navigate and use. You can see all different items that you've never tried before. These are a favorite. And they have an option where you can just buy it again. So you'll already know your favorites on the app and you don't have to waste time figuring it out. These are so addicting. The sour cream and onion ones are my favorite.
This is so good.
Is it? I haven't tried that one yet. I have to try the matcha one. Also for kids, you all probably know if you're a parent, it's really hard to get your kids to eat healthier snacks, but everything on the site that's made for kids and has less sugar, no sugar, and is a healthier option looks cool too. So your kids will grab this instead of something unhealthy. This time I got the chewy granola bars, chocolate chip. I'm definitely eating these. This is not for Shyla. This is for me. But I did get these as well, which are the Bob Snail Roll fruit snacks. And these are so good. Have you tried these?
I haven't.
The apple raspberry ones are so delicious. They kind of remind me of like the old school fruit by the foot.
Yeah.
But like a healthier version with no sugar.
We love making pasta, so of course we got some vodka sauce and some of the pasta noodles. I can't wait to cook this up later tonight.
He makes a lot of the dinners, so I specifically got that because at home we make a lot of pasta because it's so easy and quick. And I didn't forget the dogs.
The good boys.
Because in addition to Thrive Market being a must for affordable groceries that I can get right to my door, including low sugar and high protein items, they also have things for pets. They have all kinds of food for babies and kids. They've got snacks and treats, even wine, vitamins and supplements, drinks, as well as personal care items, household and cleaning products, and the list goes on.
And you know, we have such a busy schedule, what with our editing, the baby, running a business. We have saved so much time and money. We've checked and compared prices, and it's totally worth it.
You can also customize your shopping. They have over 90 diets to shop from, like vegan and even allergen-free. Plus, you can save time with the Buy It Again feature, which I told you about, which is so easy. And another thing that makes me feel good about using Thrive Market is they're also committed to supporting people and the planet. Thrive Market seeks out brands and products that follow ethical practices, and they give back through the Thrive Gives initiative, which makes it possible for low-income families, teachers, and veterans to get natural and organic foods and products. For every paid annual membership, Thrive Market donates a free membership to someone in need.
Thrive Market is also the first online-only retailer to accept SNAP and EBT, making it that much easier for so many families across the country to access healthy groceries that they need.
And only when you go to thrivemarket.com/darklivity will you get 30% off your first order and a free gift when you join. So don't forget to click the link in our description box for that special offer.
And thanks again to Thrive Market for sponsoring today's video.
Now, if you are coming back, this is part 2 of a story that we covered last week. So you might want to stop where you are, look in the cards or below in the description box, because you got to watch part 1 because it's not going to make any sense. There is a lot to the story. But if you are coming back, when we left off, we had just found out that Zachary Hughes was being investigated, and then he turned himself in for the murder of Christina Parcell.
Even though it was starting to look like Zach was involved, the motives and the reasons behind it were still unclear. They still didn't have access to his phone at this point, so they couldn't really dig into the conversations he had with John Mello.
I mean, this was a classically trained Juilliard graduate pianist. They were like, could he have done something like this? The community was a kind of outraged. They're like, there's no way, I'm going to wait. I don't believe it. He couldn't have done this. I mean, this was not something you saw every day, and that's what made this case stick out. The media was on it right away. The headlines were reading, classically trained musician. And then you saw this man who just looked like, somebody famous. So right away, it drew in a lot of mystery and questions. And you don't need to prove motive when you're talking about a murder, but that's the biggest question. Like, why would he do something like this? But I just kept wondering, why don't they just get John Mello's phone? Because wouldn't that be the same thing? Wouldn't they be able to see the same messages? But then I thought about it and I was like, wait a minute. They wanted GPS location data and other things on Zach's phone to prove where he was. And that's why they wanted to open up his and get his passcode, which they actually compelled him to provide in a motion with the court. They wanted Zach to provide the 6-digit passcode to law enforcement so they could access his data, including conversations that he had, photos that were on his phone, location data, and all of his internet history to see if he had any transactional things occurring between him and John that could show this was a conspiracy. Plus, they wanted to know if Zach deleted anything from his phone. So unless they got that passcode, they couldn't let the forensic equipment do its job. It searches and it parses everything and it puts it in an organized manner. You've probably seen this in other cases. But that didn't happen until April, months after Zach's arrest. So let's backtrack a bit. Zach obtained a defense attorney right away, and they wanted him to be released on bail awaiting his trial. So, of course, they filed a motion, and in this motion, they put forth that he was an amazing person, an upstanding citizen in the community. He did charity. He was a brilliant musician. And they even had a number of his friends, his colleagues, church members, even like professors throughout the community write letters on his behalf, showing that he wasn't a flight risk. He turned himself in. He was respected in the community.
He was looked at as a vigilante, like you were saying with Luigi Mangione.
Right. And people on Zach's Facebook page that was devoted to all of his music and everything, they were like, let him go. He killed a wild Mochester.
Exactly.
And she deserved it. Kind of what you were saying before. We can't say the words, but, they believed it was the right thing to do.
Totally.
And remember when you said, if law enforcement won't do their jobs, I'll never fault someone for killing a P word, Another comment said, Greenville County was doing nothing to stop this, meaning what was happening behind the scenes. And they said, free Zachary Hughes. He saved that child's life. And the comments went on and on, with some people not believing Zach could ever do something like this. And here's what I take a major issue with. Although I respect our justice system and the courts, prosecutors have to do their job. They had to put Christina's murderer behind bars. That was their sole goal. Christina was dead. She couldn't be tried for CSAM, and Brad was already in jail. the court would deal with him separately. So it's almost like what Christina and Brad had done was swept under the rug.
But the only reason that Brad's thing came out was because of the murder.
Exactly. And that's what I take an issue with, because the prosecutors had this tunnel vision. And I hate to say it, but it reminds me of when cops have a quota at the end of the month or the end of a quarter. They have to get a certain amount of tickets written, right? Well, prosecutors want to win cases, point blank. That's their reputation. And prosecutors knew they were going to have a problem. If they wanted to convict Zachary Hughes, they had to ensure that the jury did not see him as a hero.
And that's when the legal battle really kicked off. Prosecutors filed a pretrial motion that changed everything. They asked the court to block any evidence showing what Brad and Christina had done. Basically, to exclude anything linking them to producing, directing, or acting in anything related to the CSAM stuff. Most importantly, they wanted to make sure the jury never saw the CSAM evidence law enforcement had found. Because if they did, would anyone really believe that what Zach Hughes did wasn't justified?
I know, and this is so hard because I wonder if the same will happen in the Stephen Stern situation somehow, like with his other charges, they're going to be severed from the murder charge. But this is hard to understand in some ways because isn't the motive too connected to separate it? I mean, that's how I felt anyway.
And it's so funny, you think like there's this battle of the justice of good and evil, and yet a prosecutor's like, well, this is clearly evil. He's like, I just want to do good for myself. I want to win this case.
That is how I felt, but let's go further and they'll see what we mean by this.
The defense saw it completely differently. They were planning to argue that Zach acted under legal principle of defense of another, meaning he wasn't just acting out of emotion, he genuinely believed he was protecting Aida, especially after every system that was supposed to protect her had failed. The courts, law enforcement, even her guardian ad litem, they didn't just drop the ball, they actually helped her pull away from her dad. Things got so twisted that Christina was actually able to flip the narrative and claim that John violated the Hague Convention. Normally, that treaty is meant to stop kids from being taken across borders without permission and to make sure that they return quickly. But in this case, it was used against John, not to save Aida, but to keep her from the only person really trying to protect her.
It's very frustrating, to say the least. The reality was that the justice system hadn't just overlooked Aida. She had been actively pushed through the cracks because her father was seen as problematic, as someone who refused to accept an investigation that had cleared Christina and Brad because he knew the truth. And if it wasn't enough, evidence suggested that Christina and the guardian ad litem were working behind the scenes to have John's parental rights terminated altogether. Since he was still in Italy, all they needed was 6 months of unpaid child support to trigger a legal loophole, and that would permanently sever his parental rights. Wow. Sometimes the law can work for the wrong person. Zach's trial started on February 10th of this year, 2025, so just a month ago. And the first day of trial, it was the prosecutors with their pretrial motions trying to exclude all the explicit material from coming in at all. And one reason they argued was that because Brad Post himself was a witness for the state, he would be coming in and getting on the stand, albeit in his orange jumpsuit. But the state didn't want the jury to know why. They're going to see that he's a criminal. He's in orange. And that's because the prosecutors needed him to help their case. And look, I will be the last person to defend a killer. I hardly even like to give them a mention in these videos, but obviously we have to show you and tell you what they have done. But it did bother me that the jury ended up so in the dark. I completely understand when something is so prejudicial, to the defendant, and you can't bring it in because maybe it's unrelated. Maybe it's something they did years ago. They stole something.
This is hardly unrelated.
Right. And I agree. Sometimes it's just a prior bad act and they don't want to let it in because, it's not the crux of the entire case. But it seems like that is what's happening here. And it seems unfair.
But one thing we have to keep in mind is that Brad's case hadn't even been tried yet. So all that stuff they found was still just alleged. It hadn't gone through to the courts, and there wasn't a jury conviction. So that made it tricky to bring into this case.
Right. It was a mess because the evidence was that it happened. There were pictures of Christina in his phone. It was there, but the state wanted it removed. Kind of like, you know what? Brad just happened to be Christina's fiance, and then she got murdered. They wouldn't acknowledge that she was in the photos and videos, which was very frustrating to someone like us who know the truth and know everything in the case and have read everything. The state was also going with the argument that it was against the Victims' Rights Act. And in most cases, I agree with that. It's about not shaming a victim in a case against a defendant who harmed them. I get it. And I understand if this was a minor infraction or if they were just talking about her sex work or something like that from her past. But this is different. It's a major, major crime that was committed. A crime with some of the sternest penalties, but that's under federal law. And apparently, all the material was found under Brad's control on his device. But there was a reason for that. He controlled Christina. He actually had a clone of her phone in his possession to monitor what she was doing at all times. This was an actual phone, another iPhone, and it was a copy of her phone. I don't even know how you do this. And he would have both his phone and her phone, and he could look at all of her text messages, look at her apps, and they purposely kept everything off of her phone. So we're going to be playing you a portion of the state's argument so that you get an understanding of how this went down. We do have to censor some words, but I'm sure you know what they are.
The state filed a motion, an amended motion, to exclude any reference to any evidence of the child pornography. And I say the alleged child pornography. Again, it has not been substantiated in any court, as Brad Post has pled not guilty to those cases, to his particular case. All of the items were found on devices in his possession or under his control. And so our first argument, Your Honor, was that in this particular case, in the case of who killed Christina Parcell, Zach Hughes has been charged with that crime. That particular crime that may or may not have been committed by Brad Post has absolutely no relevance to this particular case. And so that's of course our first argument of that. And we highlighted in our motion, Your Honor, the highly, highly prejudicial effect of putting in the fact that child pornography may have been on some of his devices there. And I cite State v. Cooper as well. Evidence which can have no other effect to cast a bare suspicion upon another or raise a conjectural inference that the crime was committed by another is not admissible. But not only is there conjecture, Your Honor, there is absolutely zero relevance to any and all child to this murder case, and there's no nexus, and the defense cannot provide a nexus at this stage in the process. And so, Your Honor, we would ask you to exclude any and all reference to child pornography, which goes to also Brad Post's testimony as well. We've also asked this court to limit the testimony of Brad Post. And for the record, Your Honor, his attorneys asserted a blanket Fifth Amendment protection on his behalf in relation to that. It's my understanding State v. Lawrence is the main case on that as well. And the key to that is that he's not an inculpatory witness. He's at the bottom of the chain when it comes to evidence against Zach Hughes. His testimony will be, I've never even met Zach Hughes. I don't know Zach Hughes or anybody that from in the public. And so Zach Hughes, the name of Zach Hughes will not come out of his mouth other than I don't know who he is. So by allowing impeachment evidence, pursuant to Rule 608 and 609, diving into his current charges, because they're not convictions yet, of a non-inculpatory witness is what State v. Lawrence and others stand for. And so when you have a non-inculpatory witness, your ability to go into their potential impeachment sort of diminishes and it lessens as you go forward. All the other cases that we cited, Your Honor, are folks who were eyewitnesses to crime or they were in the car before a murder happened. In this case, Brad Post is merely just going to talk about how he arrived at her house at around 11 o'clock on the 13th and found her deceased body inside his house, her house, and the house where she lived with her sister and her daughter. So we would ask this court to restrict that any mention of that evidence on those grounds in relation to Brad Post, as well as the impeachment. We would ask this court to limit the impeachment or the conversation about his pending charges to have you been charged with a crime would be the extent you can go into his pending crime now that he's defending against. Otherwise, Your Honor, at the end of the day, going into his particular crime would serve this jury absolutely no purpose as to whether Zach Hughes committed this crime or not. Again, at this stage in the proceedings. So we would ask, Your Honor, that And we would also ask you to restrict the defense's ability to cross-examine him on that particular area. As, again, it's not relevant and it's extremely prejudicial.
So how is it that what Brad and Christina were doing have no relevance to this case?
He said zero relevance?
Zero relevance, no nexus. And by the way, in legal terms, that's a connection, a relationship, or a link between two or more factors or elements in the case. Because Brad didn't know who Zach was. That's what they were arguing.
Right.
And all they can say is, have you been charged with a crime? They can't even ask him like what crime it is and nothing. All they're going to say is like, when Brad gets on the stand, were you charged with a crime? Is that why you're wearing orange? Yes. And then they have to move on. He can't even be cross-examined, and the crime is not allowed to be exposed.
You almost wanted to turn the trial off at that point.
I said that. I was like, you know what? I'm not going to even watch this because I felt like it was so unfair from the beginning. But I also understand why, because they did argue legal concepts that were actually there.
Before you think we're justifying a murder, we've talked about this together over and over again, and we are definitely not doing that. We haven't even let you hear what Zach has to say, which we are about to play. But the real issue is killing someone to protect them has its limits. In South Carolina, the legal principle of defense of another allows the use of force, including deadly force, to defend another person against imminent danger. It's known as part of the state's Stand Your Ground law.
This is the same law that was in Ashley Benefield's case, meaning individuals have no duty to retreat if they're in a place where they have a right to be and have a reasonable fear of imminent death or great bodily harm. And defense of another person extends to people. If someone believes that someone's in imminent death or great bodily harm, they can use deadly force to defend them. That's all it means. It's like if you were being attacked, I'm not being attacked, but you're being attacked. And I have a right to be here because it's our home. Let's just imagine. I can pick up something and I can hurt the person that's hurting you. And it makes complete sense.
Totally.
The problem is, this does not fall squarely into what Zach did. No one was home except Christina. So keep that in mind. The theory up to this point is that he killed her because she was harming Aida and no one would stop it. That's not really in defense of another.
Because she wasn't there.
I mean, not that she wasn't there, but it's not happening in the moment. It's not an imminent fear of death or great bodily harm. This is also a defense to murder. So in a criminal prosecution, the burden of proof is on the prosecution to disprove that the defendant acted in self-defense or defense of others beyond a reasonable doubt. So it shifts the burden. That's why I think this case is so fascinating, because usually burden of proof is on the prosecution to prove that beyond a reasonable doubt, the defendant committed the crime. The defense has no burden to prove anything. But in this case, they now have a defense. So now they have to prove their defense, the burdens on them, and then it shifts back to the prosecution and they have to prove, no, that defense is not valid. So it's like a ping pong back and forth. Let's hear from the defense and why it should be allowed in.
Your Honor, this, I just have to deal with this from the get-go. The state has told Your Honor once again that these allegations related to the child pornography are, quote, wholly unsubstantiated. This is a refrain that we've seen repeatedly in the pleadings from the state. We have made it very clear in our pleadings in response to theirs that we in no way want to discuss this topic irresponsibly, discuss it gratuitously, but over and over again, when the state alleges that it's wholly unsubstantiated, we just have to address that, Your Honor. It is highly substantiated. We have evidence to show that. And as an officer of the court, I've represented that in pleadings. Mr. Moyer has represented that in pleadings. And that evidence exists, and we're prepared to introduce that evidence. But I want to set that straight. That evidence exists. We're prepared to show it and prove it. As it relates to what the ask here is in the motion, extraordinary relief they are seeking. 16,000 or more images of child pornography. We have photographs. We have videos. They want Your Honor, without having seen any of it, without having it introduced at trial, any exhibits whatsoever, to categorically exclude 16,000 or more pieces of evidence that we may or may not seek to introduce. So they want Your Honor, again, to, from the bench, without any evidence introduced of any kind, without opening statements, with nothing, they want Your Honor to exclude that evidence.
Mr. Mormon, assuming that that is the case, their point still is, I don't care if you have 45,000 videos, it's still not relevant, is what they're saying, if I understand correctly. So in relevant being makes a fact and issue more probable than not, it is highly relevant. There are cases that discuss relevance in the context of Rule 402. Relevance relates to evidence that helps the jury get at the truth. All right, and I would actually cite State versus Sweat for that proposition, and I can give you a cite on that. But relevance is evidence that assists the trier of fact, in this case, the jury, to get at the heart of the matter, to get at the truth of the case. Right, and the truth of the case, the bases for the relevance in this case are enormous and will become much more clear after the trial starts. And that's one of the reasons why Your Honor should, at a minimum, decline to rule on this issue until the trial starts and Your Honor can see some of the evidence and what the cross-examinations are. But Your Honor, to again, in a vacuum, to exclude this evidence before Your Honor's had a chance to review it, before it's even offered in evidence, I'm not even sure how you do the 403 analysis, right? Because it's such a fact-intensive analysis. The other thing is when the state argues that it talks about prejudicial evidence. Absolutely. Every piece of evidence the state seeks to offer against Mr. Hughes they believe is prejudicial to Mr. Hughes. Every piece of evidence, should we decide to do that, we offer is going to be prejudicial to the state. But it's not unfairly prejudicial. This evidence is not unfairly prejudicial, Your Honor, because this evidence came to pass based on, in no small part, the actions instituted by Brad Post, who was engaged in this illegal conduct with Christina Parcell.
Now, the next day was the first official day of trial with all the witnesses and everything, along with the judge's decision whether the court was going to include or exclude the evidence.
I've spent a considerable amount of time looking at case law, these excellent briefs that have been presented to me, your oral arguments, and I am going to grant the state's motion, amended motion in limine, and I'm going to exclude any reference to child pornography involving the victim, her juvenile daughter, I think it's AMP, or Bradley Post. So I'm going to be excluding that. And that also includes the cross-examination of Mr. Post. I will get into that in a moment. I know that we've talked with counsel as far as your ability to do a proper, and he's going to be coming in for a in-camera hearing shortly. I find that it is not relevant under Rule 401 or 2. This evidence has no tendency to make the existence of any fact that is a consequence of this murder more or less likely. It will not assist the jury at arriving at the truth of this murder. The question is, did the defendant commit this murder? And that's the only issue. The child is not relevant, and even if so, I would exclude it under Rule 403 because the probative value is significantly outweighed by, and I know normally we jump to unfair prejudice, and that is part of it, but I would focus on confusion of the issues and misleading the jury. If at some point it does become relevant, then that certainly could be revisited. And again, even if it were found to be relevant, which I don't think it is, it's not coming in pertaining to Post under 608C for bias. I know that y'all, that was your argument. Certainly you're going to be protected in proffering. But Mr. Post, he's going to stand, or he's going to have his day in court. He's not pled, and he's not been tried yet. He's not a co-defendant. He's not an eyewitness to the actual crime. He basically found the body of his girlfriend, fiance, and he's going to be here testifying under subpoena.
Now, could you believe he excluded it?
Legally, based on everything you've said, yeah, I guess he had to do it based on the arguments, but it is quite unfortunate that the jury won't get to know the truth.
Yeah, I think that's a problem because in these cases, I think you made this point. We're trying to get at the truth of what happened, and everything's going to come out about how Christina was murdered. But to spare you the unnecessary regurgitation of the facts that we already told you in part 1, we're not going to play all the testimony from EMS, the police, the detectives, but there is some body cam, and we did show it before, and we're going to show it again, what Brad looked like when they arrived and how he was dressed and how he was on the phone with his lawyer at the time and telling the cop to basically wait a minute. He's like putting up his finger like, oh no, just wait, officer. I'm on the phone with my lawyer. Now, they did not play the audio, but they did explain what was happening. We showed you this earlier. And everything we told you about was presented at this trial, of course, except the things that the judge excluded. That was never told to the jury. So all the positive things about Christina, who she was in her community, how she was killed, and Brad in his orange jumpsuit did tell the jury how he found her, but they never knew why he had been arrested. And he laughed when asked where he was currently residing. Let's play that.
Good afternoon, Mr. Post. Where do you currently reside?
Greenville County Detention Center.
And have you been charged with a crime?
Yes.
Do you know the victim in this case, Christina Parcell?
Yes.
How do you know her?
We dated and were engaged on and off about 6 years.
Christina's sister, Latina, testified, and we're not going to play all of that except a couple portions like this one where she makes it clear to the defense on cross-examination that her sister didn't just die, she was murdered.
So after the death of your sister, Christina, where was Aida?
I'm sorry, could you clarify the question?
After your sister died, where was your niece?
I would also ask you to rephrase that question to be accurate.
Okay, who did your niece live with?
So after my sister was murdered, what is the question for that?
Where did your niece live?
The judge was literally like, just answer the question.
Yeah, he kept whispering that. He's like, just answer the question. He's trying to keep peace there because the judge knows the truth. So I'm like, just wish he would have let everything in. But I did hear that. And she was starting to become a hostile witness. Latina does seem like a loving sister. She's lost someone that she loved, even if their relationship was contentious here and there. But I wonder if she knew anything about what Christina was like in her dark moments. I mean, she definitely knows now at this point, she must know about what they found on Brad's phone. By trial, I'm sure she's read everything that she could get her hands on. I think she's likable as a witness. I mean, the jury's only seeing what's in those four walls of the courtroom. She talked to them. She looked right at them when she was speaking. And throughout the testimony, she was very compelling, telling them all about her sister's struggles against John Mello, who was actually painted as a really bad guy. However, by now, he had gained custody of his daughter again, and we're going to talk about that more in just a minute.
But Aida was briefly in Lutina's custody until something happened. There were accusations Aida made about living with her that got looked into, but let's put a pin in that for now.
Yeah, it's a lot, I know, and there's more and more coming out even now. This is ongoing. This just happened a month ago, so this is ongoing.
Lutina got super defensive about cross-examination, even when they were just asking her the most basic questions.
Yeah, and it made me wonder if the indecent things she did are somehow more forgivable because she was murdered. I get it. The hierarchy of crimes, murder being at the top. But for example, when asked about whether she knew about Christina's past as an escort, she said those things were allegations, just like the allegations that John Mello made against her that she was kidnapping her niece. So she was just like, I never believed him because John's a bad man. He lies. He said I was kidnapping my niece. She's making it seem like, oh, yeah, that's not true.
Even though Christina admitted in a deposition that it was true.
Exactly. And that was actually objected to during the trial. And you should have seen the smirk. Well, we're going to show it to you on Lutina's face when it was sustained.
I was aware that allegations had been made in family court, just like there had been allegations made I was going to try and kidnap my niece. So I didn't lend credence to them.
Okay, you aware that she gave a deposition in which she did give credence to those allegations?
Objection, Your Honor. Sustained.
And to be fair, she's not the one on trial. Her sister was brutally killed. So she's innocent and forced to be there for the state. But let's get to Zach, because this wasn't really a whodunit. Experts in forensics testified that Zach's DNA was found under Christina Parcell's fingernails that had broken off during the attack. But the why was still unknown until Zach took the stand. Before we get to hear what he said, I found a Reddit post, and you know how much I love Reddit. And in the true crime discussion subreddit, there was a post by a person called Beer Goddess 84. It was entitled, "I once went out for drinks with Zachary Hughes, the pianist who has just turned himself in for the brutal murder of Christina Parcell, a vet tech from upstate South Carolina." So the poster authored this post close in time to when Zach had turned himself in, and she said, quote, "I'm not sure how much national media attention this case has gotten, but back around 2014-2015, I met Zach Hughes, a famous pianist who turned himself in the other day for the brutal October 13th murder of Christina Parcell, a vet tech from upstate South Carolina. I only met him once several years ago. I was a waitress at the Flying Saucer, a craft beer bar that had over 70 different beers on tap. I was very curious about the group and their show at the Koger Center of the Arts, as I'm a huge fan of classical music, and I used to play the clarinet. After talking to the group, Zachary Hughes insisted I meet up with them at Bar None for drinks later. I agreed, and I told them I'd meet as soon as I clocked out for the evening. I drove myself to the bar they asked me to go to. Zach bought me 2 drinks. Over those 2 drinks, all he did was brag about himself. I got bored and insisted I was ready to go home. He walked me to my car and swooped in for an unexpected kiss. I accepted the kiss, but still insisted on going home. I guess he got upset. Not sure really. But after I told him I was for sure going home for the night and not to his hotel, he turned the kiss thing into a bet with his friends, saying that he won the bet since he kissed the girl. He also, for some reason, made a jab at my new to me 2008 Toyota Yaris, which I was proud of buying at the time, as if I drove some super shitty car or something. And I saw yesterday that he murdered a 41-year-old woman in a very brutal way, end quote. Later, she said that she didn't really think much of it at the time. She's like, I met a cute pianist who asked me for drinks. I accepted, but he only talked about himself, so I got bored. He didn't live here, so I never saw him again until I saw his mugshot. I only spent about 2 to 3 hours with him total, so aside from me thinking he was all about himself, I didn't really know much of anything about the guy, but I remember thinking about how cool it was to travel the world and have a career in classical music. End quote. Okay, so this was interesting. I mean, finding a post like this from someone who does have some personal experience, and then just imagine going out with someone and then later seeing his mugshot and realizing he allegedly murdered someone, not just shot someone, but stabbed over 31 times. I would be freaking out. Like, I would just be replaying that, because what if he got even more mad that night? Like, she doesn't know his reasons for doing what he did with Christina Parcell. It's interesting to me because even seeing his mannerisms on the stand, I could tell that he was full of himself, or at least he came off that way. I mean, that was what it looked like to me. Like, he was very pretentious. It was like he was holier than thou. He was special. And I wasn't surprised when his testimony kind of echoed that.
I know a lot of people in the music scene that kind of act like he does.
Like, they're kind of come off like they're better than everyone else.
Pretentious was a good word.
I think also being in his position, he's used to people that are in awe of him.
Sure.
I'm just mentioning this because I thought it was something I never saw before. But in that motion for bond, they listed, I don't know how many YouTube videos of him. Like, his attorneys posted YouTube videos in the motion for bail to show, like, look how amazing he is. It's just different. Like, I understand being part of the community, but there is an air about him that I think he like holds himself to this higher standard.
First, Zach went into his whole life story, stuff we've already broken down for you. He talked about his parents adopting his siblings, Grace, his childhood, how he fell in love with music, and how he started playing piano at 4 after his dad bought an old one at a garage sale. Then he got into his morals, his Christian upbringing, and how he comes from a good family.
At this point, it was all about establishing his character. We already know he's always been an upstanding citizen. He's likable, talented, all of those things, but he's also a murderer. So let's get to that. We're going to flash forward to Zach explaining how he met John Mello.
Introduced himself when you were Prince Philippines.
I didn't know who he was, but he came up and said he was a musician and asked if I'd be willing to take a request. He said his daughter's favorite piece was Claire de Lune, and I know that piece really well. It's a favorite piece of mine, so I played it for her.
What, if anything, did you observe about Aida while you were playing Claire de Lune?
Like I said, she was 8, so she was pretty young. I had taught a lot of kids before, so I had experience with kids that age and their attention spans, which tend to be very short. So I was really impressed. I could see her out of the corner of my eye, and she was just enraptured from start to finish. She wasn't running around. She wasn't on a device. She was just completely caught up in the music, and that made a big impression on me.
That encounter sparked a friendship, one that would prove to be anything but innocent.
Right or wrong, John opened up to Zach about his deepest fears, mainly about Aida's mom, Christina, and her rich boyfriend, Brad Post. Some people might say he was just venting, others might say he was grooming Zach, trying to manipulate him. He was planting ideas, hoping Zach would do what he couldn't.
Tell the jury what your impressions were of Aida as you got to know her in the late summer, early fall of 2020.
They were extremely positive. She's a really special kid. She was definitely mature beyond her years, like I talked about. She could hold a conversation with adults. She looked you in the eye. She seemed really cultured, like she'd had a lot of exposure to different places. She'd traveled like almost as much as I had. She was always telling me about trips she and her dad had taken, and it was just very evident to me that she was a very healthy, loved child. She clearly loved her dad, and it was obvious that he had done a great job raising her. And I was convinced that she was a happy, healthy kid, and he was a great father.
But it's interesting because to him, it seemed like Aida was healthy and thriving at this point.
Zach really seemed to care about John's daughter, and watching their bond grow brought him and John even closer. It wasn't long before John started opening up to Zach about his worries about Aida's mom. And then one night, John's whole vibe shifted.
Describe what his mood was at the end of the night.
Towards the end, at one of these taco stands, he became very pensive and even distraught. And he started to tell me about really grave concerns he had about his daughter, specifically when his daughter was with her mother, Christina Parcell. And he essentially said that whenever Aida's mother had visitation, he just never could rest easy until he got Aida back. And that he just didn't trust her, and he thought that she wasn't responsible and that she might even hurt her at some point. And I mean, frankly, the mood of the evening took a big dip because of this. It was clear that he just was terrified about the danger his daughter was in. And this made a big impression on me.
And we know that the jury doesn't even know what those concerns really were. And as a result of those concerns, John explained to Zach that he would flee to Europe with his daughter since he couldn't protect her. Zach was relieved, and he thought that was a great idea. It allowed him to go back to his own pursuits and kind of forget about Aida, who he now believed was being harmed by you know who, Christina and Brad, and you know what kind of people they were. But now he felt that she could truly be safe.
When John told you that he and Aida were going to go to Italy, what did you think about that? What was your reaction to that?
I thought it was great. I knew at this point that John's parents were Italian, and Aida, I thought, stood to gain a great cultural experience from it. And I just thought if I had the opportunity to travel and live in Italy when I was 8, I would have jumped at that. So I was really excited for both of them.
We also know that Christina found out John had removed Aida from the United States. And by the way, in the end, the court dropped all the charges against John once he came back from Italy, because as a parent with primary custody and Christina only having non-custodial visitation, she actually had no standing to bring a case against him. But at the time, with the evidence Christina provided, she was able to get the Hague Convention to help her get Aida back.
This is when the guardian ad litem was designated.
Right. She was designated to make sure that it was in Aida's best interest and to advocate on her behalf. And we briefly mentioned her. Her name is Vanessa Cormilo. And well, there is currently a lawsuit against her
Big
brought
surprise.
by John Mello because she believed Christina, and I listened to her testimony, and I do truly believe that Christina was very convincing. I don't genuinely think that Vanessa wanted Aida to be hurt.
Of course not.
No, not at all. But she was really fooled by her. And ultimately, she was not a fan of John. We already kind of told you about that. She did not like him. Many people didn't. So she was really thinking she was doing the right thing. In the end, she wasn't.
Because he wasn't getting his way, John told Vanessa he'd have her disbarred, fired, and personally held responsible if anything happened to Aida. But his outbursts only made her more determined. She wasn't just trying to reunite Aida with her mom, she was actively digging for legal loopholes to strip John of his parental rights completely. She even called him unstable. John really wasn't helping his own case. Even the cops didn't like him or believe what he was saying.
One investigator who had already looked into his allegations told John point blank, "I'm a great investigator. I know how to do my job. I found nothing, and I'm closing this case."
A year later, that same guy would seriously regret saying that.
Yikes. When it became clear that neither the court nor law enforcement was on his side, John once again reached out to Zach as a possible solution for his problems. But Zach had been enjoying the distance after John had left the country.
The frequency of the communications, just tell them about it.
Like I said, I was excited for them. I was excited for Aida to be able to have this experience. Based on what John had told me about Aida's mother, I thought it was good that there was distance in between them. And our communications had died off a bit after they left. John is interesting. He's also a lot. He's a very dramatic person. And it was a bit of a relief to just not be running into him downtown all the time, because I had a lot of practice I was doing, and sometimes I didn't have time to hang out as much as he might have wanted to. So our communications petered out.
So you heard it. John was a lot to deal with. He was loud, he was in your face, he was high energy, and probably an oversharer, especially when he realized Zach was a good listener. You know, he would sit there and listen to everything John had to say, probably out of the kindness that he felt from his Christian background. Like, I'm going to be there for him. But then Christina won, and Aida went back with her. But worse yet, Brad proposed. And this terrified John. He knew that Brad would now be even a bigger part of his daughter's life.
And honestly, for Aida, it was a nightmare. She was cut off from her dad. And the guy she was scared of now had even more control over her life. For John, it was crushing. He lost everything, including the chance to protect his daughter. He couldn't even come back to the U.S. without getting arrested for custodial interference and contempt of court. He was trying to sort out his legal mess so he could keep fighting for custody, but for now, all he had were 2 Zoom calls a week with Aida. And what he saw during those, he didn't like it one bit. So once again, he leaned on Zach for support.
What happened next?
At this point, I found myself in kind of a conundrum because, like I said, I had appreciated having some distance from John. But by the same token, I was becoming increasingly more concerned about his daughter, Aida. So while I might have wanted to not continue communicating with John for the sake of his daughter, I felt that I had a certain sense of responsibility to help him with what he was dealing with this custody battle for his daughter's sake. We began communicating probably every day, at least by text, often by phone calls. I was giving a lot of time towards hearing what he had to say, towards trying to help him in any way I could.
Zach helped John find a lawyer to help him regain custody and helped with other things necessary so he could return to the United States. John had an idea to keep Aida safe, or at least alert other people in her orbit to keep a closer eye on Aida. John told Zach that Brad liked spending a lot of his time at the Outman Cigar Bar on Orchid Drive in downtown Greenville. In fact, Brad kept a private storage locker for his cigars at that facility. But that's not all he kept there. John alleged that he had discovered through a mutual friend that Brad was a known distributor of certain material and that he had become aware that Brad actually made comments about finding Aida attractive.
Ugh.
I know. But this friend told John, oh, don't worry. Brad is mostly into individuals below her age.
Ugh.
That made John sick, and he began to wonder if that's why Christina suddenly began fighting for visitation rights on Brad's dime. At the time, Aida would have only been 4 years old. Oh my God. And that's too young?
John also told Zach that a friend warned him to be careful because Brad was supposedly trying to get bikers to kill him so they wouldn't have to deal with the custody battle anymore. Then John told Zach that when he first met Christina, she was a prostitute. His word, not mine.
Yeah, we don't use that terminology anymore. We say sex worker, but back then, this is how people referred to individuals in that field.
And to back it up, he even showed Zach old Craigslist ad that she used to post, offering to do certain things for money.
You see how all of this is coming together now? Like when we're doing part one, you're like hearing little bits and pieces of it. Now it's coming together. However, Zach was quite aware that John was not exactly a choir boy himself. Like I said, he's like, wait a minute, and you were hiring her? However, the more he got to know John and Aida, the more he learned about Christina and Brad, the more he believed that Aida would only be safe if she was away from them and back with her father.
This was also when John handed Zach a copy of Christina's deposition transcript. Instead of answering questions about whether she had been selling substances or her body, she pled the fifth to avoid incriminating herself. To Zach, this was all the proof he needed. If she were innocent, she would have just denied it under oath.
Exactly, but she's about to admit to it. But Zach began to believe that John was telling the truth and Christina and Brad were mistreating Aida. And that's when he also drew a correlation between Christina Parcell and his sister Grace. Remember the one that was adopted from Russia?
I don't say this lightly, but my oldest sister Grace was the most evil human being I've ever met in my life. She was 10 when she came into our family. The Russian government didn't tell us much about the kids, so we weren't aware of any, if any, behavioral issues there may have been. And there were many, but specifically with her. I would describe her without reservation as an affectionless psychopath. It wasn't that she was immoral. It was more that she was amoral. She didn't have a sense of right and wrong. Her emotional compass was seemingly non-existent. She was just dead inside. She was a masterful manipulator and deceiver. She could lie at the drop of the hat for reasons that might involve her personal gain or just for the heck of it. She would invent the most absurd, crazy, gruesome stories just to get a reaction out of people. And she could talk about this stuff with the same tone that you might talk about making a sandwich. And this from a girl that I knew between the ages of 10 to 14. It was incredibly disturbing. And the things I learned about that type of personality have stayed with me my entire life because I've never met someone like this since. And with one exception, I had never even heard someone describe another human being like this. And one of the things that is so dangerous about someone like this is, she was literally like a vampire who would just suck the goodness out of other people around her. She could be very emotional, and she would fake these emotions in order to elicit a response in you, a sympathetic response. And if, for instance, you were accusing her of doing something like stealing or hurting one of her siblings, she would weep and just beg you to believe her and say, no, I didn't do it. And then if you would present her with irrefutable proof that we knew you had indeed done this, it was like a mask would just fall off her face. And I mean, she'd just look at you with shark eyes. And no matter how many times we would go through this cycle with her, where she would deceive us and betray our trust and hurt people in our family, she would always reel us back in, because there's something in normal, good people that wants to believe that someone like this can change. You want to believe that, there's redemption for someone like this and that they might change their ways and become a better person. And she knew that. And she would use that in order to ingratiate herself again and regain our trust, only to betray that trust again harder than she had the first time. And this happened dozens of times, and it created an incredible amount of strife in our home. She could manipulate my parents and drive a wedge between them. She was just an incredibly intelligent person and incredibly evil. And having met someone like that, it made me able to understand, and even though I didn't want to, accept the fact that people like this exist, whether you want to believe it or not. And if you trust them, you are only ever going to get hurt by them again. You have to forgive them at some point. And that was a very difficult thing for me to do. It took me years, but eventually I had to accept an apology from this girl that I never got and was never going to get. And I had to do it for myself. But I would never trust her again. That would be insane, for my own safety or for the safety of others. So this is an experience which I think is somewhat unique. I think most people have not met someone like this. And I mean, we might watch true crime documentaries or things like this, and we know that technically these people are real, but they exist on Netflix or in someone else's lives, and we never once believe that it could be someone we know, or that it could be someone living next door, or that it could be someone that our children play with, or, someone we might allow to look after our kids. So knowing this is essential to understanding my reaction to what John began to tell me about Christina Parcell in April and May of 2021, after Aida had been taken back to Greenville. He started describing Christina Parcell's character and her personality. And as he was going through various points, he kept saying, Zach, I know you're not going to believe me. Like, I know this sounds overblown and dramatic, and you probably think I'm exaggerating. And under other circumstances, I would have, because John he's a big storyteller. And, when people are talking about their exes, like, everyone thinks their ex is the Antichrist. So, of course, I was sort of predisposed to be biased against what he was telling me, except for the fact that point by point, everything he described about Christina Parcell was exactly the same as my sister Grace.
I gotta say, I don't know Grace like Zach did, obviously. I have never met her myself, and I don't know Christina, but I don't think Zach ever met Christina either. I mean, she definitely isn't a good person. So in essence, I guess that makes her a bad person, but I didn't really see the correlation. But I'm not Zach. Something triggered him about Christina, and it brought all that pain back that he experienced with Grace. Or at least that's what he wants this jury to believe. Maybe John shared things about how Christina was charismatic and lovable, and that he thought she was going to change, but she hadn't.
Well, yeah, John did say that Christina was super charming, smart, and talented. And Zach said that knowing that was the key to understanding how he reacted to these things that John shared. Because those details about Christina Parcell were way darker than anyone could have expected. John talked about how easily she lied and how she showed no remorse, which brought back memories of what he went through with Grace. That thought of Aida being raised by someone who reminded him of Grace, he couldn't handle that.
Yeah. And then when he mentioned true crime documentaries, I'm like, and that's what you are in right now. But I get it. We may never meet someone so evil. And it's really scary to think that normal looking people can be very evil. And I think some would even call Zach evil. Am I right?
Right, and the fact that she didn't kill someone, but he did.
But she killed innocents. And that's a death sentence in many ways, growing up with all that trauma.
Exactly.
But in May of 2021, Zach actually went to visit John in Italy. And while he was there, John shared even more distressing news about Aida. While in Italy, John had an online visitation with her, and she was now living full time with Christina. Zach was shocked at her physical appearance. In just a few weeks, it looked like she had gained about 20 pounds, and she had this vacant stare in her eyes. And Zach said he could see the spark dying in her eyes. Now, he had personally seen the dramatic changes to Aida's demeanor and her appearance.
I would often be within earshot to where I could hear their conversation. Often I would be able to observe the screen of his phone or computer so I could see Aida's face, her disposition. And on one occasion, I said hi to her.
What did you notice about her, or what did you conclude about her while you were watching Aida during the visitations?
So John had been telling me for weeks, Zach, Christina's killing my little girl. Like, I can see the spark dying in her eyes. And again, when I first heard that, I thought, aren't you being a little dramatic? Like, I hadn't seen her, but it just seemed a bit much. When I saw her in these visits, I didn't feel that way anymore. She was not the same little girl that I had known in Greenville when I first met them. She had put on a great deal of weight, probably about 20 pounds, which is roughly a quarter of her body weight. For an 8-year-old girl, that's a lot in a short period of time, but it was much more than that. It was her demeanor. Her spirit was just, she was morose. She was depressed. Like that spunky, precocious, lively little girl that I had met was just not present there. It was a complete change in character. And I mean, John would ask her how she was doing, and she would always try to give a good response. Like, she would try to smile and say, "Oh, I'm fine, Daddy," and try to put on a good face. But it was clear that she was doing that because she didn't want to worry her dad. She didn't want him to realize how poorly she was doing. And it just reminded me so much of myself when I was a little older than she was, with what I've previously described with Grace. It's this, you internalize things. Like, she's a strong person. And she was trying to be stronger than she was probably ready to be at that age. And despite the stoic, strong exterior she was trying to put on, I could just see that she was being tortured. Like, she was drowning. And him saying that the spark was dying in her eyes was absolutely accurate. I could see it. I could hear it in her voice. I could tell it in her demeanor.
Now, before I continue, I really think it's important to discuss something that isn't always understood by everyone in these types of cases. And I didn't understand it either. You know, I've done a lot more research into things like this, so I'm starting to gain more of an understanding. So it's okay if you don't understand what it's like to be someone like Aida. But someone in this situation can exhibit outward signs. And we know in Zach's retelling, he believed that the weight gain and the vacant stare were proof of what John said and that it was happening. It's the type of observation that could have a valid and deeper meaning. Rapid weight gain in circumstances like this, since we know it was actually going on, it can suggest a subconscious shield, even a desperate bid to repel the monsters in her orbit. This is straight out of the shadows of trauma psychology, and it's unfortunately very real. Victims of this type of mistreatment do often gain weight, and the reasons are really complex, and they're also heartbreaking. Experts have long noted that minor individuals enduring such horrors, especially prolonged, like John was alleging, they can undergo dramatic physical changes. For John's daughter, those 20 pounds that Zach spotted weren't just extra flesh, they had been a psychological armor. The mind, even not fully developed, can pull levers that the body doesn't even consciously register. Some survivors gain weight as an unspoken defense mechanism. And it's real, like they want to keep people away. And so they figure like even that space, even that extra space with my body can like repel them. It's really sad. And I'm not sure if any of you have seen this. It is like, it's supposed to be a funny meme, and it says, the more you weigh, the harder you are to kidnap. Stay safe and eat cake. And although it is somewhat funny, if you really think about it, if you really give it a lot of thought and let it sink in, it's sad. For a girl who has been betrayed by a caregiver, forced into unspeakable acts and threats to remain quiet, the weight gain could be a stress response. Cortisol, the stress hormone, it floods your system and it can cause you to gain more weight. There are also women that I've read about who want to desexualize themselves. So they purposely try to make themselves look, undesirable, which is very sad, but they've already been harmed. So they want someone to stop violating them. It's not about vanity. This is someone trying to protect themselves.
We can only control ourselves, and we can do our best to keep ourselves out of situations that we can't control.
Yeah, and as a dad, knowing like how John knew what was going on.
I mean, as a father of a daughter myself, I would do anything I can to protect her.
And if you were seeing her in that state where you had no control and you saw her physically changing and her from a happy child to more and more just like vacant and empty and not there, I think it would be really hard not to do something.
Exactly. Back to the story. Now about that vacant look Zach said he saw in Aida's eyes. That kind of dissociative glaze. Experts say it's a common sign in survivors. Paired with her sudden weight gain, it just added to what Zach saw as proof. He believed it was Aida's way of pushing the world away, like her mind would just check out to escape what was really going on. Zach felt like her whole shift wasn't some random phase. It was a quiet scream for help that nobody noticed until he did. And by then, he felt like it was too late to save her from the hell that he believed she had already been through and was still stuck in. But he said he truly believed that she was building this subconscious wall to protect herself from it all.
Yeah, and he did think that he saw something others didn't. Like he was kind of the hero that was like, nobody's doing anything, and I see something because I've seen his sister Grace and how bad she was, and now a person like that's controlling this little girl. It was a lot.
When Zach got back to Greenville, he was set on helping Aida. He started putting together mailers using documents John had given him. One of those was a deposition where Christina only admitted to certain things after she was under oath and shown undeniable proof.
Yeah, like her past line of work. That's what she finally admitted to.
Right. This, too, reminded Zach of something Grace would do after she was caught.
I believed that based on various things she freely admitted to in her deposition, that she had a history of using and manipulating men in order to get money and in offering sexual services in return. She admitted to being a porn actress and producing a film in South Carolina where she rubbed her feet on a man's penis. She admitted to using SugarDaddyForMe.com, where she sought out romantic relationships with older men with a clear emphasis on it being a trade, essentially a reciprocal thing, where she was seeking out to be taken care of financially. She said that she had a general disinterest in having children at the time, which is why that she gave up custody of her daughter to John Mello when her daughter was very young.
Well, that's a lot. And Zach was hearing it straight from Christina herself. Remember, John placed his own ads on Craigslist with several photos of Christina asking for information, and the ad read, "Seeking this woman for a court case. Her name is Christina Parcell. She has also advertised herself as Sweet Caroline or Sweet Caroline Warren, an SC Belle de Jour, and she lives and works in the Easley Greenfield area. If you dated this woman or had a communication encounter with her, please contact us through the posting. Thank you." Now, I told you. Several people answered, some who had come across her services and others who came across her more organically. And one of them was a man named Alex Fields, one of the several people who provided John with an affidavit supporting his claims, which John was using in his custody petition. It read, quote, "My name is Alex Fields. I responded to a Craigslist ad. A photo was included in the ad under the communion section. I recognized the woman. When I met her about 2 months ago, midsummer 2018, she had much shorter hair. I was at the Halls Chop House in downtown Greenville when a woman approached me. She said hello and proceeded to ask me if I was looking for a date. She said something to the effect of inviting me to bed for an amount of money and that we would not be rushed at all. When I refused her proposition, she proceeded to offer me narcotics. I declined and ended the encounter, end quote. This affidavit was further proof to Zach that Christina was what John said she was, and all the other things must be true about Brad as well. It made sense. With John Mello trapped overseas, unable to return to the U.S. without facing legal consequences, Zach Hughes took it upon himself to help John regain custody of Aida, and he wasn't subtle about it. Zach did 2 things. First, he put his concerns in writing. He drafted an affidavit of his own, expressing deep fears for Aida's safety, making serious allegations about Christina Parcell and Brad Post. He had it notarized, giving it the air of official credibility, but that wasn't enough. Zach wanted everyone to know what he believed was happening behind closed doors. He tried to force action. That's why he took it a step further and compiled all those damning packets of information, stacks of documents containing material from Christina's past, old ads featuring photos of her unclothed in suggestive poses, and Craigslist listings from her time as a sex worker, and anything that could cast doubt on her character. Anything that might make people question whether Aida was truly safe in her care. And then he sent them everywhere, we told you. He sent them to the police, the guardian ad litem, Brad's house, Christina's home, her workplace, the cigar bar where Brad had a locker, even to their neighborhood, Christina's new neighborhood. Anyone who might have had an influence. Anyone who might be in a position to intervene.
But Zach wasn't just raising concerns, he was going all in with a full-blown smear campaign. It was a calculated move to pressure the authorities to take another look at Christina and Brad. The only problem, by then John Mello had already burned too many bridges. The courts, even the guardian ad litem, none of them were listening to him anymore.
It's kind of like the boy who cried wolf. You know, John's been abrasive. He has a personality that rubs people the wrong way. And not to mention, they don't have proof of the present. They're kind of like using her old type of work. I mean, yes, I guess some people could see that as concerning, but sending it to neighbors and all that, it doesn't really do what they intended.
He had this habit of threatening anyone who didn't side with him, pushing away the very people who might have actually helped. And the most important part, through everything, Aida never once said that these things were happening to her. Not once did she admit it.
Actually, it was the opposite. She denied it over and over again. And that's tough. It's another thing that's really hard for some people to understand. Why not just say something? Victims and survivors almost never disclose what's happened to them because it's hard, especially when the perpetrator is someone that they love. It's their own mother. They often don't tell, not because they don't want to, but because they can't. The fear is suffocating, and that fear has been put in them by the person who's trying to silence them.
Right. And they were probably told, like, oh no, this is fine. You're not in any danger.
And they also manipulate them and threaten them.
Uh-huh.
And they'll tell them things like, no one's going to believe you.
Right.
Like if you tell, you're going to be taken away and then you're going to have to go to jail. Like they'll just make things up, especially when someone's, not in the mindset to understand because they're not wise. They haven't had years behind them of lived experience. And they'll also say things like, you don't want mommy to be hurt, right?
Right.
And that's really fucked up. And I honestly hope by talking about these things, we can bring awareness to what these victims go through. Maybe it'll make people understand more why they don't say anything. They're made to feel responsible for what's happening to them. And they're burdened with shame and confusion and this twisted sense of loyalty to the person that's hurting them. Trust becomes a foreign concept when the people meant to protect them, parents, authority figures, and even guardians, are complicit or dismissive. And law enforcement and social workers, they may be asking the right questions, but fear just gets in the way. It might be like a look from their parent, like across the room, a subtle threat that they have to keep quiet. And that's enough. But John and Zach were still convinced that she was being horrifically mistreated. And eventually she did come forward through a guardian ad litem, and she sued her mother's estate for what happened to her. But before we get into all that, we have to go back to the past. If law enforcement didn't believe John Mello, if the courts didn't believe him, if Aida herself denied it, then what exactly was Zach fighting for?
And how far was he willing to go? Even with John Mello still over in Italy, no one had any doubt who was really behind the wave of anonymous mailers. Law enforcement, the courts, Christina, Brad, they all saw it for what it was, targeted harassment. So going back to their plan to keep Aida's word safe as possible, they wanted anyone who interacted with her to start questioning everything that felt off or looked wrong. And John didn't mince words when it came to Zach. He straight up told him, harass them relentlessly.
Well, he actually used different words. He said harass the shit out of her, but same difference, right? But he wanted to make them scared, make them too afraid to keep harming Aida. In John's mind, this wasn't just about making noise and waging psychological warfare. He wanted Christina's neighbors to look closer and to report something that they might question. And I understand the intentions, and we've gone back and forth on this, but all it did was make everyone mad, which is not the goal.
In May of 2021, what, if anything, did John ask you to do for him?
Given the extremely grave nature of John's concerns for his daughter, especially while she was in the custody of her mother, Christina Parcell, and potentially being exposed to her mother's boyfriend, Brad Post, who John believed was a pedophile and is a pedophile.
Objection.
Sustained. I instruct you to totally disregard the last comments made by this defendant.
And Zach, you would just, could you just tell this jury what John asked you to do?
Yes. Given his concerns, John asked me that if I believed his daughter was in grave danger, would I be willing to kill Christina Parcell for $5,000?
What did you say when he asked you that?
I was shocked and insulted by the request, and I gave him an immediate and unequivocal no.
As you can see, Zach was starting to let go, not to hold back, to call these people what he knew they were. But he was also making a huge claim, a conspiracy. He just admitted under oath on the stand that John Mello solicited him to kill Christina. That means that John Mello could be charged in this crime. And that's not exactly something that you casually ask a friend to do. Oh, so just kill my daughter's mother. But John was sure that Zach would take him up on the offer. And later, John made a second offer a few weeks later. And in this offer, he asked him if he could convince him that his daughter was in danger if he would kill Christina for $10,000. Again, Zach was insulted and turned down the offer. He told him there was no amount of money that he would ever consider in exchange for killing another person. Zach told John the only way that he would possibly consider taking that kind of action would be if he was convinced that his daughter was not only in danger, that the only way to rescue her from that danger would be to take Christina Parcell's life.
And at that time, Zach claimed that he wasn't convinced that murder was the solution.
Is it ever, though? I don't know. Some people would say yes. Others would say it's the ultimate sin, the ultimate crime, and nothing can come close. But Zach's most significant concern for Aida was the fact that both Zach and John were convinced that Christina and her now fiancé were in control, and they had more and more access, and that she was now in more immediate and grave danger. And they weren't wrong.
But even then, Zach still wanted to try every legal option that he had left. Before long, he started getting really worried about John's mental state and the whole situation Aida was stuck in.
This is when John told Zach that during one of their video calls, Christina had dragged her finger across her throat. Remember that? A silent but chilling gesture, a threat, a warning, that she was telling him in no uncertain terms that she was going to have him killed. Another reason to believe that he was running out of time. Zach was undeterred. He doubled down. On September 21st of 2021, Zach took his accusations directly to the system. He submitted that affidavit we told you about to the family court on John's behalf. He went a step further, filling out a complaint with South Carolina's Department of Social Services, posing as a concerned neighbor who had personally witnessed Christina verbally and physically mistreating Aida. But in Zach's mind, it wasn't about deception, but creating an opportunity. What are your thoughts on that? Is lying ever okay?
Absolutely.
I mean, I think there are circumstances where it is.
Especially if you're calling the fire department, 911. What's your emergency? I think I hear screaming.
I said in another video, I admitted that I would probably lie to 911, to the operator, to get them there faster, because we've seen so many times they waste minutes, are just ticking by, and they're like, tell me this, tell me that. No, someone's dying. Yeah, they need help. Get somebody here right now. And they can just figure it out later.
Zach kept thinking if the authorities could just get Aida alone, if they would just listen, she'd finally speak up. She'd finally admit to the horrors her mom was putting her through. But nothing happened. And that's when Zach made a decision that would change everything. If no one else was going to save Aida, then he would.
It sounds like he wanted to be a superhero, like one of those kids that just grew up looking at comic books or something. But in real life, there are laws. But he didn't want to kill someone. It went against everything that he had been taught, his faith, his morals, his Christian upbringing. But he could justify it. It was for the greater good. It was in defense of a child. That made it right, didn't it? And so, on the morning of October 12th, 2021, Zach woke up knowing exactly what he had to do. Today was the day he would save Aida, but something just wasn't right.
He put his phone in airplane mode. Twice. Each time, hesitation crept in. His nerves were eating at him. So instead of going through with it, right then, he spent the day getting ready. He wrapped the gift box but left one side open. It was a clever disguise for his hand and the gun he held inside. He bought a dozen red roses, checked his knife, packed his black backpack with everything he thought he'd need. And tomorrow, there'd be no backing out. Tomorrow, Christina Parcell would die.
And ultimately, did you take Christina Parcell's life on October the 13th?
Yes, because I believed it was absolutely necessary to save Aida, and I was right.
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained. I ask you to disregard the testimony that you just heard.
I want to talk about the timing. You've alluded to it a little bit, but I want to be more specific. October the 13th. Describe for the jury why you felt that was the time, why you believed it, or why it was necessary to do it on October the 13th, specifically, or in this period of time.
I had been wrestling with this since June. As I previously stated, since the end of June, I believed Aida was in complete and grave danger every moment of her life that she was living with her mother. And the other things that I had tried to do to save her from that were not working. So I was having this incredible wrestling match within myself for these months, feeling that I needed to do something to save her, and yet feeling this incredible reluctance to do the one thing that I knew would save her because of how terrible I knew it would be to do it, even though I believed it would be right. So by the time October 13th rolled around, I had been grappling with this for a long time, and I was experiencing a tremendous amount of guilt that I had waited as long as I did because I should have acted sooner, and I didn't do that. So I had come to the realization that I had gotten this offer to go on this cruise ship, and I would have been leaving the country for a long time. Essentially, it was now or never. I had an opportunity to save her from a danger that I knew she was in and that I knew was not going to cease. And I just couldn't go on with my life and leave her to drown. I mean, I had a great life. I had everything. I made money doing what I loved. I was going to be going to the South Pacific to play concerts for rich people on cruise ships. I mean, but how could I go and enjoy that and know that I was leaving a kid to her fate, a kid who thought that I was her friend? I would never have been able to look at myself in the mirror again if I had done that.
I think he probably thought He'd flee to another country where they didn't have extradition and he'd get away with it. But I think his conscience got the best of him. Or maybe he and his lawyers truly imagined that they could get jury nullification. So he came back and he went to trial. Zach said this wasn't about retribution or revenge. He wasn't angry or anxious. The only thing he felt that day was worry that an innocent bystander would become involved. So he took great pains to pick a day when he knew Christina would be alone and no one else would get hurt. But that also meant Aida was not really in imminent danger or great bodily harm in that moment. Not in the law's eyes anyway. But on October 13th, Zach woke up at 4:30 in the morning and methodically prepared himself. Black pants, a black beanie, a black shirt, a gray hoodie, and to complete the disguise, a white COVID mask. He loaded his bike into the back of his gold Ford Ranger, climbed inside, and drove off towards his destination, 122 Canebrake Drive, the home of Christina Parcell that she shared with her sister Lutina, and of course, Aida.
He took a page out of Photo Stulis's book, shaved his head so no hair could fall out or be pulled, dressed head to toe in black, and parked his truck a few blocks away where no cameras could catch his plates. Nothing that could trace him back to the vehicle. Then he pulled out his bike off the truck bed and rode off into the quiet suburban neighborhood.
But Fotis didn't really get away with it, so that wasn't a great plan.
No, he did not.
At all. We already told you what evidence they had on him.
Zach already knew Christina's routine. John Mello made sure of that. She had a job interview for a vet tech position, and she'd be back soon. All he had to do was wait. And when he saw her car pull up to the driveway at 122 Canebrake Drive, he knew it was time. He left the bike outside, reached into his backpack, and pulled out the tools he'd brought for this exact moment. Then Zach Hughes walked up to Christina Parcell's front door, something we later saw on the Ring camera. And even then, he wasn't sure which weapon he was going to use, the gun or the knife. He brought both.
Listen to this. It is actually chilling.
Let's talk about you arrive at the house, 122 Canebrake. Do you remember about what time you arrived there?
I think it was a little after 9 in the morning.
And do you arrive there on your bike? Is that how you did it?
Yes.
And you've testified about this a little bit, but tell the jury what you're wearing.
I had on black pants and a black thermal and a gray shirt over that. I had on a black beanie and a white medical mask. And I had on black gloves and a black backpack.
Do you remember how many vehicles were parked in the driveway when you got there?
One.
When you arrived at the house and you got off your bike, what did you do?
I laid my bike down in the driveway and I took my backpack off and I took out the box that had been gift wrapped that had an end open. And I put the .22 revolver in that box. And I put the backpack back on my back and I took a bunch of roses and I walked up to the door and I rang the doorbell. And I was shaking and freaking out at this point because there was nowhere I wanted to be less than at that house on that morning. And when I rang the doorbell, the door opened and a woman came to the front. And I thought it was Christina Parcell, but I wanted to make sure. And I also wanted to make sure that no one else was home. So I told her that while I was holding the box and the roses, that I had a delivery for Lutina Parcell, her sister. And she told me that Lutina wasn't home. So at this point, I realized that Christina was at the house alone. And I handed her the roses. And I took the revolver out of the box and I pointed it at her. And I told her to be quiet and to go back into the house, which she did. And I followed her into the house and I shut the door. And I was experiencing such anxiety that my body wasn't really doing what I was telling it to do anymore. Like when I realized that I couldn't use the gun, which was unloaded at this point, my plan had been to try to knock her unconscious because I didn't want to cause her or anyone any pain. That wasn't my intention. I just wanted to save Aida and to make sure that no one else who was a bystander would be involved in this or could be endangered in any way. So I tried, while she was holding the roses, to strike her on the head and knock her unconscious. But my body was fighting me because even though I knew who she was and what she was doing and the danger that was putting Aida in, I was still looking at her and I was seeing a sympathetic figure. I was seeing a woman, and I had always been taught never to hurt a woman, to always protect women and children. So when I went to strike her with the gun, my hand didn't really do what I was trying to tell it to. I essentially pulled my strike. It felt like a time I had been cliff jumping with friends. I have a big fear of heights, and there was a 30-foot face that you could jump off and jump into a deep pool of water. And when I would run up to the edge, I would try to get a running start and jump off the edge, and I just couldn't. Like, my body would stop me against my will. And I had to try to do this 10 or 15 or 20 times before I could actually get myself to go over the edge. So when I struck her on the head with the pistol, that's what happened. It didn't knock her unconscious, and I hardly struck her at all, to be honest.
It's not every day you hear a killer admit to killing someone and how they did it. But this wasn't the work of a cold, calculated professional. Zach wasn't some hardened killer. He was a fumbling, nervous amateur, at least from the way he described it.
Yeah, this so-called hitman, who in reality was barely 3 pounds lighter than Christina and just a few inches taller. And now he was inside her home, face to face with the woman who he had been fully convinced had to die. That's when things turned brutal. Christina sensed his hesitation, and she fought back hard.
And during this period of time, the roses had dropped, and the petals and stems had scattered. And as I was hesitating, I realized that the situation was quickly getting out of control. And if I didn't pull myself together and act soon, this was all going to end up terribly for Aida, because what was happening to her would never be uncovered.
Now we know why the rose petals were there, but also, he's not convincing me. He lost me at this point, almost like he was saying now he thought Christina was going to kill him. I mean, there was a gun in the home in a back bedroom that they found later, but he still had a gun too. It's like he wants us to see her as the aggressor now, when he forced his way into her home under false pretenses and with the intent to kill her. So she had every right to fight back.
This is when Zach said that he realized he was going to have to force himself to kill this woman who was fighting back harder than he had expected.
He had a gun. That's so much easier to, pull a trigger than to stab someone with a knife. Stabbings are personal. They're up close with the victim. But he decided to pull out the knife, intending to get himself out of this life or death struggle that he created.
So I realized that I was going to have to somehow force myself to do this at any cost. So I pulled out the knife I was wearing. And even though I knew I wasn't going to be able to strike her with any amount of force, I still tried. So I started striking her, though my strikes were pulled. And I think the knife made contact with her, but it wasn't stopping her, and it wasn't inflicting anything that could be a fatal blow. And she started to fight back. She realized I was hesitating, and it became a struggle. And in this struggle, all I could do was try to overcome this resistance I had towards doing this thing. Even though I knew it was right, I still had this physical and emotional resistance to doing it. So I just kept striking her. until finally we fell on the floor. And at this point, I had just tried to take my mind out of it and just try to get through this and finish it as quickly as possible, because I realized that it was only becoming prolonged, and I had to do this in order to save Aida. So I don't remember how many times I struck her. I just remember that when it finished, we were on the ground, and I stopped striking her when she stopped struggling. And at this point, I stood up, and I was still freaking out, and I was in kind of a daze. And I was just trying to pull myself together and figure out what I needed to do to leave the house. And again, I wanted to make sure that I didn't leave anything behind that would connect me to it, because then I believe John would be connected to it, and it would only further put Aida in danger, because I didn't know if Christina Parcell was the only person involved in what was happening to Aida.
I can't imagine being in that courtroom. I imagine that it would be thick with shock. This man had just told everyone he committed murder, and now he needed to disappear. But in his panic, he made mistakes. Big mistakes. In his rush to flee the scene, he failed to properly clean up the forensic evidence that he left behind. He tried dumping paint thinner on Christina's hands, thinking it would destroy the DNA. She had scratched him, and his DNA was under her fingernails. She fought for her life. At 9:27 a.m., Zach bolted from Christina's home, and 1 minute later, surveillance footage captured him speeding past 207 Saratoga Drive, barely a quarter of a mile from the crime scene. He was moving fast, he was panicked, he was desperate, racing towards his truck. And that truck, it didn't go unnoticed. We know that. Later, cameras would catch it leaving the area, a bicycle still in the back, just as it had been when he arrived. While on the stand in his own defense, Zach was banking on jury nullification. He was hoping the jury would be so disgusted by what Brad Post and Christina Parcell did that they would be unable to render a verdict at all, or ultimately find him not guilty.
Zach did everything he could do against the order's court to stay silent about the fact that the victim was, in his words, a despicable pedophile. Someone who did things to her own daughter, her friends, and even pets.
I mean, it is sick. And he didn't really say enough to drive it home, in my opinion. I listened to this whole thing. It was for hours and hours on the stand, and it wasn't descriptive enough for me to believe, or to make the jury believe that anything really bad was going on, because he couldn't really tell the story. Anytime he would try to go into a detail, the prosecution was quick with their objections, and the judge would quickly remove the jury and then give them instructions to ignore what they had just heard.
But they did hear things.
Sure, they did. But they probably also believed that since the judge said ignore it, maybe it wasn't true. I would love to hear from one of these jurors, because now they're free to speak. And I hope at least one of them does come forward, especially after they're permitted to research this case and know the truth.
Zach did try to tell the jury the truth, and for that, the judge charged him with contempt and gave him a 6-month sentence.
Yeah, but ultimately, it didn't really matter, because I think you can guess what this jury of 7 men and 5 women found at the end. They deliberated for just 3 hours and found him guilty of first-degree murder, and the judge sentenced him to life without parole. The prosecutor did an interview on the hallway afterward. Let's listen.
So what did you think about that verdict?
It's been a long, hard-fought 2 weeks. A lot of fights in the courtroom, a lot of battles in the courtroom. I'm very tired. But really, this case is about Christina Parcell. She was brutally murdered by Zach Hughes, and we proved it. And this was a very emotional trial, because you rarely have a defendant get on the stand and detail such a heinous crime on a justification that makes no sense. And that was very emotional for us, very emotional for the jurors, very emotional for the courtroom. And we're just glad that this jury did what they did. And they got some sort of justice for Christina and her family, especially her sister Tina Parcell, who's been through so much. And Tina said it so well. She said it better than anybody could in the courtroom about the impact this has had on her and her life and what he did to her sister. So we hope that this gives them some solace, some justice, a sense of healing in which they can move on. But there's no winners today. Everybody lost something in that courtroom today. And that's very sad. However, my duty is to make sure this county is safe, and the people are safe from people that commit crimes like Zach Hughes. And today we accomplished that feat.
He said it was an intense trial, but then he said it's not every day that you have a defendant admit to killing the victim. So doesn't that mean it was kind of handed to them? But speaking of things being handed to someone, Christina's sister said he wanted to kill someone and he was given a target on a silver platter. That was her belief. That's what she said that she thought happened. Did he cry? Did he shake? Did he look visibly distressed? He said the word repulsed, but did he once look repulsed? He said the word vomited, but did he ever once look nauseated as he described dragging my sister through my living room? It was quite emotional. I mean, she did lose her sister.
Zach's father said the only thing necessary for evil to prosper is for good men to do nothing.
That's an interesting statement, but he raised this man, instilled this belief in him, so I'm sure they had similar beliefs. And even in the Bible, murder is prohibited, but it's one of the deadly sins. But it's also justified in certain circumstances, right? It can be argued, I'm sure, that Zach was just exterminating evil. But the prosecutor went on to say, this sort of sense of vigilante justice that Zach Hughes discussed on the stand isn't allowed in South Carolina or the country, and we're not going to stand for it here. And if you engage in that, we are going to prosecute you to the fullest extent of the law.
And the defense make a record right away that they intend to appeal.
And the prosecutor took the attitude of like, I want to see them try, saying that legally they don't stand a chance because he doubted all of those facts would ever be let into a court. But I beg to differ. I think if Brad's case had already gone to trial and he was convicted, then it would be much different. I may be wrong, but would it change anything? I don't know.
Well, the defense also just made a statement that saying they're going to appeal this case has been read into the record several times. There was a lot of proffers, a lot of testimony without the jury in place. Do you believe that appeal will move forward?
You know, after 2 weeks of trial, I'm sure there are some appealable issues. But I'll tell you this, the judge did an excellent job analyzing the law. We were very deep in analyzing the law. My co-counsel, Jake Hallfirth, did a fantastic job digging in and analyzing complex legal issues all along the way. The defense attorneys did an excellent job protecting the record. And so everything is protected. Everything is going to be ready for the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court to review. And of course, we will take whatever analysis they take. But I feel that the prosecution put together a very strong, clean, legally clean case.
There has since been a number of Aida's friends who have come forward and they have filed lawsuits against Christina's estate and against Brad Post. So more of the truth will come out. The allegations are against Christina that she took photos and videos of these people, as well as Brad. And some people on Reddit have wondered if perhaps Christina herself may have been a victim of the same kind of thing when she was growing up. I don't know. Could she have been? Maybe. But none of that has been revealed, and I doubt it will now that she's deceased.
We may never know what drove Christina to inflict unimaginable harm on Aida and her friends and even animals. We don't know what the future holds for Aida, but after Zach admitted John solicited him to commit murder, John Mello was arrested while Zach was on the stand and charged with accessory before the fact to a felony and solicitation to commit a felony.
He was denied bond, and Latina was standing there speaking to him through a piece of glass, and Christina's ashes were in an urn in her hands. Let's play that for you.
I brought Christina because she deserves to be here for this. We have waited 1,224 days for this. And I wish I could tell you it felt really good, John, but it's not going to feel good yet. I've been at every day of this trial. I've borne witness to what you all have done. Every day of this trial, every day out of this trial, with my family, with your family. You did this to your family. Your child has to know that you did this to her family. I don't know where I will be when you go to trial, but I assure you, if I am at all capable, I will be there every day. When you are convicted, I will be there at every parole hearing. Everyone. You will never get rid of me. And that is your own fault. You did this to yourself. That's all I have, Your Honor. Thank you.
I don't think it will ever feel good. But what about Aida? She's the one that has to heal from this nightmare. From the court evidence, we know Christina and Brad were responsible for creating, producing, and distributing over 15,000 images and videos. That's chilling to think about. I did dig around and I found Aida on social media, but I want to respect her privacy, so I'm not going to share her profiles or anything like that. But from what I saw, she's safe and she's thriving under the circumstances. She has friends, she goes to a good school, and she even makes really cute, like, get ready with me videos, like a normal teenager. But we know she's not a normal teenager. She's been through things that thankfully many of us will never have to go through. And I told you we would mention this. While in John's care, before his arrest, Aida had visitation with her Aunt Lutina, who just made that passionate speech. Well, there was a police report that I read that Aida caught her aunt taking a photo of her while she was showering. So visitation was temporarily suspended. We know Christina's sister has vowed to keep fighting for custody of John and Christina's child, but for now she remains a ward of the state. We also know that in October of 2021, Aida was removed from her aunt's care at 10:30 at night by the same detective who had cleared Brad and Christina a year earlier. And this raises yet more questions about her fractured path forward. That detective must have felt the weight, knowing that he let things slip away.
We talked about many evils in this case. We told you in the beginning you may not like anyone we talk about. We were, of course, referring to Brad, Christina, John, and Zach.
And maybe you won't like Lutina either.
But we hope you remember Aida and appreciate how much she went through. But here's the thing. Healing is possible. For what we know about her, she seems strong, wise, and resilient.
And let's hope that she can recover. We don't know what's next for her father. He's awaiting his next court date. This isn't just a postmortem on another true crime case. It's a mirror reflecting how trauma can twist lives generation after generation. And if not stopped, there will only be a continuation of this sick cycle. It's a heavy story with many lives ruined and one taken. Christina lost her life. Aida lost the person she would have become without this heavy weight of the trauma. Zach lost his freedom, and John, who will soon enough face his own justice through his actions, has taken and altered the lives of people he had no right to harm. Even with the excuse he was doing it in defense of another. We saw how well that defense strategy worked out for Zach. While this is a heavy story, it reminds us that understanding the whys doesn't erase the harm, but might help us stop the cycle someday, maybe for ourselves or for someone we love. If you or someone you know is experiencing mistreatment, help and resources are available. We will leave them below in the description box.
Yeah, and please don't be afraid to say something.
It might save your life or someone else's. Thank you so much for being here for this story today. We will see you in our next one. Bye.